This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah, welcome everyone. So, in the previous segment, we looked into the major document that gets created in a waterfall methodology based project, which is nothing but your business requirement document and the functional requirement document, right? So, in these documents, when you specifically talk about the requirement section, in BRD, you talk about the business requirement section. In your functional requirement document, you talk about the functional requirements, right? So this particular section has to bring out all the details about what are the major features and functionalities that are supposed to be part of this particular project, right? So in order to do that, again, the way you document this particular section could be slightly different, varying from one project to another. One major way you do it is you create either a use case diagram or you create something called as use cases. Okay, as I said, these are optional things. Like you might as well write in a typical bullet points format and bring out all the details. Even that is okay. But sometimes maybe there is a specific demand from the stakeholders or your project manager's suggestion saying that it is good to use this particular format to document the requirements. Okay, so sometimes you go for use cases and sometimes you go for use case diagrams. Now, this is a typical uh, confusing question which is asked by the interviewers. Like, okay, tell me the difference between a use case and a use case diagram. Interviewers usually have this sort of knack, or they try to confuse the candidate by asking to define some confusing words, like tell me what's the difference between use case diagram, or tell me what's the difference between requirements elicitation and requirements prioritization, or tell me what's the difference between prioritization and sorry difference between you know oh, we looked into this, right? Verification and validation. Or they can ask, difference between efficiency and effectiveness, these sort of things. So it's better that you have an idea about this particular segment. Uh, we can get into the details in the upcoming videos, but right now, this particular section is to give you a brief about where do you use a use case diagram and where do you use a use case. Okay, so let's get into it. First of all, when you talk about a use case diagram, it is for the visual representation. Some of you might already have looked into what is a use case diagram. It looks typically easy to understand, but it all depends on how you relate that to your specific project requirements and how do you create a use case diagram for this particular project. Okay, that brings out the entire difference of what value add you create. So use case diagram is a visual representation. It generally talks about a big rectangular box in between with which is referred to as system. Then you have actors on either side and you have use cases within the system. We will, if possible, look into an example in the next video about a use case. Whereas a use for a use case diagram, whereas for a use case, it is a descriptive detailing that you bring into that particular requirement. Okay, you provide a detailed functional description. It's nothing but you write it down, everything you write about the who is going to be actor, what is the use case, what are the conditions, what are the assumptions, and what is the functionality that is expected. Is there any exception scenario, is there any negative scenario? You bring about all those details in a written format. Use case diagram is for stakeholder communication. What does it imply? In your workshops, when you're actually discussing about how a requirement has to be represented, so that you use this use case diagram, take it to the workshop, and show it in a slide and initiate the conversation for that particular feature. That's how you can use it for stakeholder communication. Whereas your use case is for the requirements elicitation, means you have already got a specific feature or a functionality, basic details, and now you want additional information about it. So you want to dig deep into it. That's when you do the requirements elicitation, and that's where your use case comes into picture. You cannot have a descriptive understanding using just a diagram. You need to put down the points. That is where your use case comes into picture. For a use case diagram, it needs further analysis. As I said earlier, it is just a diagrammatic representation, so it doesn't give you the full picture. It is at a very high level. Whereas your use case, it is so descriptive that it can actually be used by developers and the testing team in order to implement, in order to do the coding and create test cases. That level of detailing will be there in your use case. Your use case diagram is more for conforming the alignment with the business goals. As I said, when you create a use case and show it to stakeholders and say that, okay, based on the current understanding for this particular functionality, we will have this person as a primary actor, this person would be the secondary actor, and this is how the interaction will happen. There is an include relationship here, there's an extend relationship here, so on and so forth. So that sort of information you'll showcase. Stakeholders will agree, will disagree, will add few more points saying that yeah, this feature also needs to happen in this way, etc., etc. So that is a high level understanding wherein you're conforming the understanding with the stakeholders or the business teams. That's what you use the use case diagram. Whereas the use case which is there, sometimes you can even go further and add the technical details, like what version is required, what tools are going to be used, and you can drill down further. As I said, typically what comes into the acceptance criteria of a user story, that can be part of your use case. Okay, so this is how you can differentiate. If you're asked in an interview, my suggestion is that you pick up some example and if possible draw a use case diagram and show that this is how a use case diagram looks like, and then prepare a table, create the use case description and say that this is the use case for the same requirement. When you do this, you're actually clarifying the questions that the interviewer may have about your understanding. If you create an example, talk about it in both ways, do the comparison and tell, it'll give that confidence that yes, you are really aware of it. Okay, we will spend more time on it. Don't worry about it. In fact, maybe in the very next 1 or 2 segments, we will detail it out. We'll take a practical example related to our food delivery app itself, so that it is relatable to us. Okay, we will talk about a use case diagram for it, and then we'll talk about the components, how what are the steps to create a use case diagram, and then we'll switch to a use case and see again what are the steps that are required to create a use case also with an example which is relevant to our ongoing project example. Okay, so that is it. I'm again suggesting that make notes so that you'll remember these points very well. Okay. Okay. Then we'll stop it here. Thanks everyone.